what historic college coaches should be on the college football's Mount Rushmore if you want to do it. And I was thinking historic coaches, and forgive me, there's going to be a lot of outstanding coaches, and they said pick 4. So you're going to have a lot that people are going to disagree on, and probably more of the younger generation is going to disagree, and just because they didn't see or get a feel of how these coaches were way back then, when there really wasn't any talent or rivals.com. It was more of a gut feeling and developing players. So kind of take this list with a grain of salt. It's just my opinion, and as you know, my opinion doesn't matter to most of you guys. And there, like I said, there's a lot of great coaches, and I know someone's going to, especially the younger generation, I'm going to make a big stink because I didn't throw like Nick Saban in there. And I'm not saying Nick doesn't belong up there. And don't get me wrong, Nick Saban was a great college coach, but he's always did it in the Southeast Conference. What would he have done in a place like Iowa or Colorado or even Nebraska? To me, Tom Osborne had his hands tied. He didn't. Nebraska is a very small community. There's probably if I'm not mistaken, I didn't look it up, about 1 million, maybe 2 million in the whole state. You get them in the metropolitan areas in some of these places, and so it's not, it's not as easy to get players up there and to get them to stay. I mean, a lot of these players that come in are shocked when they see Nebraska, saying, "Oh man, I was expecting to come here and see nothing but cornfields." I think they still think we use a can and a string to call. Any of y'all seen Green Acres? I know I'm really giving up my age, but look at Green Acres. They used to climb up that telephone pole to make a phone call. So I think sometimes people think that's how Nebraska is and don't realize till they get here. But the one thing Nebraska has, and this is a credit to me, Husker fans, and I got to admit, in Nebraska, there's not a major sports team. There's not a NFL team. There's not an NBA team. There's not a Major League Baseball team. The Huskers is all they have. But the difference is, until you go up there and see it, until you feel it. I'm talking about going up there on a game day on Saturday. Just go up there on the off season. There's a big difference. I grew up in Nebraska, but I've lived out of state probably most of my life. And because like in Texas here, you got multiple schools and all that. So it's kind of split, and people sometimes don't care. They got the Cowboys, they got the Mavericks, they even got professional hockey team. So it's kind of divided out. But go up there and watch the fans on a Saturday game day. Just go just around the town, anywhere in the state. The one thing I like, this is the reason why, even with them losing and not doing as well as they have in the historic years that I grew up in, and I noticed it, and I'd love to took some film of this, but I thought it would be creepy me doing this, but you see a family there, the mom, the dad, then you see the 2 little kids. They're about 5, 6, maybe 7 years old. They're all dressed in red. They go to the games, and this is what they do as they grow up. So when they become adults, guess what? It's in their blood. I keep saying it's in their blood. So there's a big difference when it comes to that stuff. So because of that, my top ones was that I thought should be on there. Paul Bear Bryant was one. Again, I grew up in that era. Was an outstanding coach. He grew up in an era where there wasn't there wasn't rankings for recruits. It was more of a feel. It was more of going there and watching them, scouting them. Another one that I had was John McKay of USC. Another one, historic coach. I kind of went back and forth on this. I almost threw Bobby Bowden in there, and I ended up throwing Barry Switzer in there. And I know Barry did some things that wasn't really approved, but he probably isn't doing anything different than what would be legal now because of NIL. But I also know he's a man that cared for his players and get hit because one of his players' family member died, and the kid couldn't even afford to go home to see it, and Barry paid for him to go home, which was a violation, which is a stupid violation. But I kind of understand why they did it. And Barry took that Oklahoma team, and take it from someone that grew up in that era where for years he had Nebraska's number, dominating. The only thing that kept Nebraska probably from a few more national championships was Barry Switzer and that Sooner team. Tom Osborne learned a lot, and where his development to where Nebraska ended up being was because of them losses to Barry Switzer and what Barry Switzer had on them teams. One of the best teams Barry Switzer had was that 1978 team with Billy Sims. And I still remember that was yesterday because Tom Osborne hadn't beaten Oklahoma. And in that game, and Governor Jim Pillen, he was in that game, and he's the one that pounced on Oklahoma's 6th turnover of that game down around the 3-yard line with less than 2 minutes left in the game, maybe a minute and a half, if I remember right. It's a long time ago. It was 1978. I still remember it, though, like it was yesterday. So he has some history in that. And Nebraska only won 17-14 with Oklahoma having 6 turnovers in that game. And the sad thing is, it was a rough game. When you played Oklahoma, you knew it the next week. It was hard to go in. Normally Nebraska would play Oklahoma their very last game of the year. That year they didn't. They had one more. They had Missouri at home. And all they had to do was win that game. They would have been going to the national championship against, I believe, Penn State, if I'm not mistaken, for the national championship. What happens? Kellen Winslow and Missouri Tigers came into Lincoln, beat Tom Osborne and them Huskers 35-31. I remember that like it was yesterday. And what did the Bulls do? They rematched Nebraska with Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl. I've beaten Oklahoma twice, and Oklahoma ended up winning that Orange Bowl 31-24, I believe, but don't let the score fool you. Nebraska scored late to make it 24. It wasn't really as close as the score made it look, but for a time they had it. So Barry knew how to coach and get the most out of his players, so I'm putting him on there. And of course my last one is obviously Tom Osborne for what he's done. Just a wonderful man, smart as can be. He could predict things. If you had talked to any of his players, the way he could tell you what was going to happen in the game, and it would happen. He was the offensive coordinator for them teams, and never had a problem with his offense. He had to get that defense and things going, but by the 90s he had it figured out. He had it going on, and I would have loved to seen how many more he could have won if he would have not retired in 1997. Nebraska in them 90s was probably one of the more dominant teams you've seen in history, and it wasn't even close. So I put Tom Osborne there, and he did that at Nebraska. A lot of them players were walk-on players, walk-on kids from Nebraska that just had a desire to bleed red and play for Nebraska no matter what it took. And he went out and grabbed that talent in them key positions, running back, quarterback with Tommy Frazier, running back with Mon Green, Lawrence Phillips, Mike Rozier back in the 80s. Lawrence Phillips, to me, if he would have kept his nose clean, to me probably would have been the best Nebraska running back ever there. And again, it's my opinion, but he was that good, and a lot of his players would have agreed that too. But because of his off the field issues, some of his things that he went through in his life, I feel for the kid, and I feel like he also got a raw deal. I thought they should have got him more help. And I don't mean the university more than I mean anywhere. Life sometimes is not fair. They feel like the answer is just lock them up. And when they did that, they ended this young man's life, basically. So that, to me, is my 4 if I was going to put that on there. So again, thank you for your support. And until the next video, guys, go Big Red.